Steven Spielberg wasn't told any of the details of it.
Mr. Norman lived his life 80 miles an hour, and that's exactly how he approached the stalking scenario with Steven Spielberg.
Norman attempted to enter Spielberg's property several times last July. Police found handcuffs, duct tape, and a knife in his car. The prosecution called it a rape kit.
We really don't know why Mr. Norman became obsessed.
That really is the big mystery, isn't it?
It wasn't that he was in love with him. It was that he wanted to brutalize him.
If Jonathan Norman had a rape fantasy, there was nothing stopping him.
He truly believed that he had a relationship with Steven Spielberg.
If you believe you're having a consensual sexual relationship with another person, then you don't need to bring duct tape, you don't need to bring handcuffs to compel people to do these things.
Jonathan Norman had proven he was capable of being incredibly violent when he ran over a group of people.
He wanted Spielberg and his family to suffer. This was someone that we really needed to take off the street. I'm concerned he's going to get released. I don't have enough evidence. I need to speak to Spielberg.
One of the most powerful men in the world, quivering from fear.
In 1997, famed Hollywood director Steven Spielberg is a household name. He has directed some of the most successful films of all time.
Hold it, guys, cut! Action!
Has a beautiful family and an enviable palatial mansion. He's on top of the world, but he's not out of the reach of a dangerous, violent stalker.
Mr. Norman starts getting more and more fixated on Spielberg. He starts journaling about it. He's drinking his methamphetamine. He believed it was his purpose to pursue Spielberg, to abduct him, and to sexually assault him. And on multiple occasions, he showed up at Spielberg's mansion.
Spielberg's security people are looking on the monitors, and they see the car pull up with Jonathan Norman inside. And he tries backing it into the gate. He has this day planner on him. And in there were 2 pictures of naked men, and Norman had pasted the head of Spielberg on the naked bodies.
When we inspected his car, he had additional sets of handcuffs, duct tape, knives, a gag to silence any screams for help. There's no question that he was there for Mr. Spielberg. Essentially, the plan was to jump the wall, gain access to the Spielberg residence, accost Mr. Spielberg, handcuff him and duct tape him if need be, while he effected a rape. And if Mrs. Spielberg had been home, his plan was to handcuff her to a chair and force her to watch the sexual assault on her husband.
July 11th, 1997, Jonathan Norman is plotting his sick attack outside the mansion of Hollywood director Steven Spielberg. But more than 30 years earlier, Jonathan is living a privileged life with his family. Jazz classes, piano lessons, a seemingly normal early childhood.
Jonathan Norman had a really interesting background. He was raised in privilege in Salt Lake City, up in Utah. His father was extremely wealthy. They had a big house, they had fancy cars, they had every luxury imaginable, until the police and the feds found out that Jonathan's father had been embezzling, and that's where all the money was coming from. They actually had tunnels built from the basement of their house to a block away because the father felt that one day the police were going to show up.
It turns out Jonathan's father is right. In 1973, he is arrested for embezzling more than $500,000 from the now defunct Rocky Mountain Bank.
He was about to get a couple of years in prison, and he ran for it. Not only did he run for it, he stole the judge's car and took off. He was gone for 23 years. So they went from this very wealthy existence to basically scraping by.
George Norman, Jonathan's father, manages to evade police before being eventually captured in 1996. George's quick exit has a profound effect on a young Jonathan, according to a relative.
Even though Jonathan was only 6 years old when his father ran from the law, basically, he learned from his father that you don't need to worry about the rights of other people. All you have to do is worry about yourself. He was kicked out of elementary school for fighting, which is very unusual to have a child so young be so aggressive.
We see a progression of psychotic behavior. Classmates told us later on that he would often experiment and torture on small animals, which is a common thread for people that are likely to become serial killers.
You have no feeling for that animal. You have no regard for what the animal feels, and you feel no guilt over performing torturous acts against them. This seemed to reinforce for him that he had the ability to violate the rights of other people, not feel badly about it.
Life in Utah is not what it used to be. Jonathan's happy childhood is being torn apart, and it is becoming obvious that Jonathan's mental health is coming unraveled. The family picks up and heads to California. Little does Norman know this move will bring him closer to what will become his all-consuming obsession, Steven Spielberg.
An antisocial personality is one who is into rule-breaking, lying, deceit, lacks empathy, and may not have any remorse for when they hurt other people. And that history will often go back to childhood.
In high school, there was some speculation that he was experimenting with drugs, with methamphetamine for the first time.
For a young man with mental health issues, drugs can only make things worse. Abusing a drug that has been known to result in superhuman strength alongside Jonathan's bodybuilding make him an imposing, terrifying figure.
Methamphetamine, which is known among drug users as speed, so that the person suddenly feels a rush of tremendous numbers of ideas flashing through his mind, and as a matter of fact, with hallucinogenic type overtones.
Adding a stimulant, substance abuse, into that picture, I think that really muddied the waters about what was going on with Jonathan Norman. That hole that was left by his father abandoning him must have created this profound anger and resentment.
I think that sense of abandonment translated itself into relationship issues with Mr. Norman later on in life.
A family trauma coupled with drug abuse is the perfect recipe for a deteriorating mental state.
People with this disorder are also usually very smart, very charming. They use manipulation as their way of getting all of their needs met.
Jonathan Norman appears to be on a dangerous path. Years before Hollywood success, budding director Steven Spielberg is born in Ohio. Growing up, Spielberg is considered an outsider and has to deal with being bullied for being Jewish.
I think a lot of the bullying had to do with anti-Semitism when he was growing up, and he's talked about it a great deal. He was bullied all the way through school, and he found if he showed up one day with a camera and made the bullies the star of his little Super 8 film, all of a sudden they weren't bullies anymore.
A move to California is soon in the cards for the Spielberg family. Despite the change of scenery, the happy home begins to crumble. Spielberg's parents divorce. While the budding filmmaker contends with turmoil at home, he immerses himself into the world of film. It's his refuge.
He snuck onto the Universal set and got an unpaid internship, which, in those days would have been invaluable for someone who was really thirsty to drink up all the knowledge.
While at Universal, he's given the opportunity to make a short film for theatrical release.
So he makes a short film called Amblin. And again, he's been making movies his entire life at this point. He's still a young man. It's 1968. So he's ahead. He's probably light years ahead of a lot of the other interns he's working with.
After impressing execs with Amblin, Spielberg signs a deal to direct for TV. He fulfills the contract and makes the leap to the big screen. The director is catapulted into the spotlight with a film that made everybody afraid to go into the water.
Jaws is the film that really not only established Steven Spielberg, but established the summer blockbuster, and a movie that lived at the very center of popular culture. This is a movie that people talked about for a very long time.
Spielberg quickly becomes one of Hollywood's highest-grossing directors.
The name Steven Spielberg on a film is money in the bank for a lot of people. Steven Spielberg is one of the few directors that people will say, oh, I'm going to go see a Spielberg film. Movies are meant to transport you somewhere, and Steven Spielberg knows how to transport audiences.
Spielberg is now directing movies that are seen by millions of people across the world, but success can often attract the wrong kind of attention.
The absence of a normal father figure would cause Jonathan Norman to idolize a powerful male like Steven Spielberg.
Mr. Norman was mentally ill, but let's not confuse that with being ignorant or incapable of developing a plan of action.
In the late 80s and early 90s, Jonathan Norman, a man obsessed with pumping iron and abusing drugs, is spiraling deeper and deeper into mental illness and serious drug addiction. While Norman appears to be headed down a dangerous path, iconic director Steven Spielberg is working on one hit after another.
With the giant success of Jaws, Steven Spielberg could probably do pretty much whatever he wanted to.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
This is kind of his mogul period. This is the period when he becomes one of the most powerful people in Hollywood. In the early 90s, it seemed like Steven Spielberg couldn't lose. He understands people. He understands what people want to see. He understands how to scare people. He understands how to pull at the heartstrings. He understands his audience probably better than 95% of filmmakers working today. He gets it.
In an unexpected move, Spielberg takes a departure from his usual popcorn flicks to work on the deeply personal Schindler's List, which was released in 1993.
In amongst the Jurassic Parks and all those kind of films that he's making, he's weaving in movies with social comment, The Color Purple, Schindler's List, films like that, that might not have been expected from the guy that made Jaws. He makes this movie. It's obviously a personal story for him. It's an important movie. And, it won him his first Academy Award.
Spielberg is one of Hollywood's most bankable filmmakers. His movies continue to gross billions and billions of dollars worldwide. But his increased visibility is only adding fuel to Jonathan Norman's fire. Norman is dealing with obvious signs of mental instability and is trying to go about a normal life.
Jonathan Norman was an incredibly smart guy. He completed a degree in economics from UCLA. He had the ability to plan, have patience, have control, and he was a high functioning individual.
Something we've known about stalkers for a long time is that many of them are of at least average, if not above average intelligence. You need to have some degree of a brain to get obsessive. So the downside of having a brain is with it for many people comes a tendency to become obsessive.
Perhaps one of the first signs of Jonathan Norman's mental decline is a 1994 delusion involving his father.
He attempted to check himself into Cedars-Sinai Hospital because he had this delusional belief that his father, who was still on the run from law enforcement, had implanted monitoring devices inside of him.
We know that when you abuse methamphetamine, it can create psychosis, and there are certain times that we see that psychosis emerging in Jonathan Norman, but it did probably contribute to Jonathan Norman unraveling.
He was held overnight for observation, subsequently released the next day, with nothing in the way of firearm restrictions or any other mental health follow-up.
While dealing with his mental health issues, Jonathan leans on the shoulders of a friend named Chuck Markovich. But it wasn't the best of friendships, and allegedly it brought out some of Jonathan's violent tendencies, a frightening prospect for Chuck considering Jonathan's intimidating physical presence.
Jonathan Norman may have had some issues with his sexuality. It's clear that he had dated women in the past. He'd been violent with a prior girlfriend. He was living with Chuck Markovich.
Jonathan was a very abusive person. He actually had beaten Chuck up at one point, knocked his teeth out. I felt very badly for Chuck. Chuck loved Jonathan. He made a police report, but then refused to testify against Jonathan.
Markovich wanted Norman to be his boyfriend, but Norman didn't feel the same way, yet he stuck around. And probably that relationship was based on Norman being manipulative. Keeping Markovich around met some need in Jonathan.
In March 1995, Jonathan's erratic behavior becomes apparent.
He seemed to have internal conflicts combined within him to create a lot of anger, hatred, and I believe violent tendencies as well. It was these same violent tendencies that led him to run over a group of people.
Norman was a violent person. They weren't crossing fast enough for him, so he would try to run them down. When he missed, he then stopped and backed the Jeep up trying to hit them again. They managed to get out of the way, so Jonathan Norman ran up to one of the elderly women, grabbed her, threw her to the ground, and started beating her, kicking her. When one of the other men in the group came to try to help her, Norman started hitting him, so he was charged with assault with intent to commit deadly injury.
This psychotic episode lands Jonathan in prison.
He was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Of those 3 years, he did approximately 1.5 years, which is about the standard in California when you factor in good time, no other serious previous convictions. He would have been eligible for release after 18 months and then subjected to terms of parole for the remainder of his sentence.
While Norman whiles away in prison, constantly working out, he's developing muscle mass as well as an unhealthy obsession.
Jonathan Norman actually was in prison when he first focused on Steven Spielberg, and we really don't know why that was his focus.
That really is the big mystery, isn't it? It isn't necessarily in the nature of antisocial personality disorder to develop obsessions. It's not in the nature of the disorder to develop delusions of any kind, but it feels like Jonathan Norman clearly had an obsession and later on kind of shifted into the delusional realm.
He would disclose certain thoughts to his roommate about his fantasies involving Mr. Spielberg. The delusion that Mr. Norman had is fairly typical of erotomanic stalkers. They believe that someone rich or famous is in love with them, or is involved in a relationship with them, or is communicating with them. And clearly, that was Mr. Norman's belief.
Oftentimes, under conditions of stress, mental illness will worsen, and he may have also been at the age when it was naturally evolving anyway.
While Norman is trapped in his prison cell, his mind is free to sink deeper and deeper into his delusion until his release in November 1996.
He believed it was his purpose to pursue Spielberg, to abduct him, and to sexually assault him as part of his dysfunctional thinking that somehow that would cause him to fall in love with him and adopt him as his gay godson. So when you're doing a lot of methamphetamine with a significant mental illness, combined with the fact that he also had a personality disorder, we call that a trifecta of bad, risk-enhancing variables that were converging to make him extremely dangerous.
It's kind of that classic perception of what a Hollywood stalker case should be. You have a psychotic, highly psychotic individual and engages in a campaign to put himself in proximity to Steven Spielberg and to act out his elaborate sexual fantasies.
He had a rape kit, he had a plan, and he told everyone about that plan.
It's 1997. A very troubled man named Jonathan Norman is falling deeper and deeper into mental illness. During a prison term for assault, his thoughts are dominated by legendary director Steven Spielberg. Unfortunately for Spielberg, there's no way he could know this young man is obsessing over him with a psychotic plan to be set in motion. Spielberg is blissfully unaware. On June 23, 1997, he takes his family to Ireland to begin production on his World War II drama, Saving Private Ryan.
So 1997 is where the stalking story really begins. Steven Spielberg is in Ireland preparing the shoot for Saving Private Ryan. And meanwhile, Jonathan Norman is in the United States obsessing about Steven Spielberg, making plans to break into his house, making plans to jump over a short wall that was at the back of the estate.
Thankfully for Spielberg, he has moved his whole family out of the country for the duration of the filming. Little does he know that only 6 days later, the man who is determined to inflict a violent plan upon him is fresh out of prison and back on the streets.
When Norman finally was released from state prison, after not serving very much time, he started his mission against Spielberg. And the first thing that he did, he tried to get into Spielberg's complex. How did he find out where Spielberg lived? He went and bought a star map for $7.50. So he shows up one day, and the guard looked at him and said, "Go away." So he did, but he was still planning an attack.
It's not unusual that you see this type of persistence in going back to the location on several occasions. The thing we have to remember that this is a thought disorder. He truly believed that Mr. Spielberg and he had a relationship, and that Mr. Spielberg wanted him to come into the house and effect this plan of attack.
Stalkers never stop. They get out of jail and they go back to where they were before.
Many times people that are stalking a celebrity based on a delusion aren't going to stop just because they're put in jail. Even if they're put in jail, as soon as they get out, they're going to stalk again. So that begs the question, then what do we do?
As is often the case with stalkers, they are relentless in the pursuit of the object of their obsession. And now Jonathan is taking advantage of his closest friend, Chuck Markovich, in order to further his crazed plan.
Mr. Norman's behavior in this particular case is very much how he lived his life. He was a very confrontational individual. He had a history of violence and antisocial behavior. He lived his life 80 miles an hour, and that's exactly how he approached the stalking scenario with Steven Spielberg. There was not a lengthy road that he engaged in a pattern of behavior. When he was discharged from prison, he had a plan, and he quickly set in motion that plan to attack.
As Spielberg's security is chasing Norman off the property, they fail to notice a very sinister-looking item in his car.
Mr. Norman also had a diary of sorts that contained not only details of his plan, but also photographs of naked men with their heads cut off and Mr. Spielberg's head taped on in place of the heads that were cut off of those photographs. There's no question that he was there for Mr. Spielberg.
In Norman's diary, he's talking about coming up behind a man with this screaming mask, that he was going to dress and act scary. The problem was the first time that he showed up at Spielberg's house and he was turned away, nothing happened. However, he was caught on video camera, and Spielberg's security people saw him.
Norman has now crossed the line from a seemingly harmless fan. Police don't realize he is looking to inflict violence.
You know, at the time of the initial police contact, we had an opportunity that was missed. Our officers have the authority to place someone on an involuntary psychiatric hold if they feel that their behavior is such that it endangers themselves or others based upon their activities. There was abundant information present that would have allowed those officers to place Mr. Norman on an involuntary psychiatric hold.
At this point, Spielberg's stalking case has all the trappings of a violent thriller. It's as if Jonathan Norman has been cast as the perfect villain, deranged mind, terrifying physical presence, and no regard for others.
I remember when I first notified of this case, it smacked of the classic Hollywood scenario that we often picture from, made-for-TV movies, where you've got a highly psychotic and delusional suspect that's acting out and is obsessed with the target of their obsession.
While Norman is testing the boundaries of Spielberg's security, the director is thousands of miles away in Ireland, shooting Saving Private Ryan. He is completely oblivious to Norman's potential threat and hasn't been updated about the activity at his compound.
When all this started happening, Steven Spielberg wasn't told any of the details of it. For one thing, he's in production on a giant movie, and they probably just wanted him to focus on that and allow him the luxury of working on something without having to worry about his family. They're being taken care of by security and the police and everything else. But I also think that at that point, that Jonathan Norman wasn't seen as that big a threat. At that point, nothing really had happened.
You have all these layers of people around them. They're agents, they're managers, they're civil lawyers. And in order to put a case on, you have to get through each layer in order to be able to talk to your victim.
The celebrity needs to know what the risks are, what the hazards are. It's only fair to them, and it's incumbent upon the security people to make sure that that happens. He truly believed he had a relationship with Steven Spielberg.
This fixed belief is very common amongst stalkers.
Because he was so high functioning and he had the ability to plan, because he was so smart and actually charming as well, I think that makes him a lot more dangerous. If he believed he could do it, he could do it.
He had duct tape box cutters and handcuffs to compel his victims to do what he wanted them to do. He had very dark intentions.
July 1997. Famed director Steven Spielberg has taken his family to Ireland as he films his latest project. Back in the States, a mentally disturbed stalker named Jonathan Norman is working to track the director. Norman has no idea Spielberg is thousands of miles away.
Mr. Norman learned of Mr. Spielberg's home address through a map to celebrities' homes that he purchased in Hollywood. Based upon that map, he did some surveillance activities, drove up into the neighborhood with Mr. Markovich on occasion to surveil the location and get a lay of the land, so to speak.
He went to a car rental place, and he ordered the identical car that Spielberg's wife was driving, because in his mind, he thought if he just drove up in that car, the guard wouldn't look inside, would open the gate, he'd be home free.
But Norman's plan hits a roadblock on July 11, 1997, as he's staked out in front of Spielberg's home in the rented vehicle.
The security guard was very suspicious. The guard told him, "Get out of here." And he drove away. A few hours later, the police get a report that there's a man running through the backyards of Spielberg's neighbors' homes. He's carrying a huge stick and he's flapping his wings like a bird.
With his bizarre behavior escalating, security give chase and find Norman hiding under bushes.
He said he was being chased by jackals. We don't have jackals, as far as I know, in Hollywood.
There are multiple approaches within a short window of time in that late June, early July time period. A lot of activity, a lot of evidence of the obsession.
The LAPD realizes they are dealing with somebody with a serious mental illness. Officers conduct an on-the-spot evaluation. Norman is a free man by 10:30 a.m.
They decided there wasn't enough to keep him, so they recommended that he go see a psychologist, and they released him.
So Mr. Norman, being very intelligent, very charismatic, he has a thought disorder, but he's not stupid. And a few hours later, he was back at the Spielberg house.
Norman is back at it. Around 5:10 p.m., he makes another approach to the Spielberg residence.
Spielberg's security people are looking on the monitors, and they see the car with Jonathan Norman inside. Norman takes the car, and he tries backing it into the gate, as if he's trying to push down the gate. He doesn't succeed. The police are called at this time.
Police canvassed the neighborhood, found Mr. Norman walking nearby. At the time that Mr. Norman was detained, he had a set of handcuffs in his pocket and a roll of duct tape. Police searched his vehicle and found the other items: night vision goggles, additional rolls of duct tape, rope for ligatures, another set of handcuffs, as well as a diary. And in this diary, there were several notes as to what his intentions were with regards to Mr. Spielberg.
Make no mistake about it, Jonathan Norman wanted to do physical harm to Mr. Spielberg, and anybody that would have been in his family would have been at risk. He had very dark intentions.
The depth of Norman's obsession continues to unravel. In his day planner, he has written the names and birthdays for Spielberg's wife and children. Clearly, he's looking to do serious harm to the entire family.
The police said, "What are you doing here?" He made up a story saying that Spielberg had invited him to come over and audition for the role of a rapist, and that he knew he was on camera. So when Jonathan Norman was actually taken into custody, he was dressed in a Rambo sweatshirt and sweatpants. He was placed in a mental hospital for a couple of days. Now, his friend Chuck visited him, and Chuck was really surprised because Norman always dressed the same way, day after day after day, in a starched white shirt and black pants. And now he's wearing these strange clothes and actually asked Chuck, "Do I look scary?"
With Norman finally in a secure mental facility, the time has come to get a hold of Spielberg and work to build a case against Norman.
Victims in a case like this will feel terrified, vulnerable. They may fear that if they take on the stalker by bringing about charges, that will escalate their risk. So they're in kind of this quandary. Should I not? It's a very terrifying experience.
I'm contacted. They have this person, but they don't know if it's a stalking case or not. because one of the issues was that Spielberg and his family weren't there. I'm concerned he's going to get released. I don't have enough evidence. I need to speak to Spielberg. Here in California, we have to show that this stalker's conduct has placed the victim in fear for his safety. I don't have that aspect because Spielberg's people is still afraid to tell him about what's going on because they don't want to upset him. It's like an onion. You have all these layers of people around them. Their agents, their managers, their civil lawyers. And in order to put a case on, you have to get through each layer in order to be able to talk to your victim.
The clock is ticking. Rhonda is feverishly working to build her case, but Spielberg is still filming in Ireland. She needs to buy time in order to speak with Spielberg and get her case together.
When we talk about how dangerous was he, I think the evidence stands on its own. He had already proven that he could be incredibly dangerous. If Steven Spielberg had been home that night, Jonathan Norman was already. He didn't need anything else but Steven Spielberg to be there. He had a rape kit. He had a plan.
His people didn't want him to know that this man had been coming to his complex, had shown up with duct tape and razor blade knives and 3 sets of handcuffs.
Mr. Spielberg was completely unaware of the behavior that was occurring at his house. Mr. Norman was quite resourceful, and he was very persistent in carrying out this plan of attack. So God only knows what would have happened if Mr. Spielberg and the family had been home at the time.
As Rhonda is working to build her case, she knows this will be a challenge. Current laws state the victim must experience fear at the time of the threats. Can Spielberg really be frightened from thousands of miles away? Meanwhile, on July 17, 1997, Norman is released from custody after being assessed by mental health experts. He celebrates by seeing a movie with his friend Chuck, but not just any movie, Lost World Jurassic Park.
While they're watching the movie, Norman keeps going, "I'm the baby Tyrannosaurus. I'm the baby dinosaur," over and over and over again. He wasn't high on any drugs. He had just been released from the mental hospital, but he was still focused on Spielberg to the sense where he went to see a Spielberg film as soon as he was released.
The clock is ticking on Norman's time as a free man. His 1995 arrest will soon come back to haunt him.
Luckily for us, he was on parole for the '95 incident where he had tried to run down the group of people in Santa Monica. I contacted his parole officer and we had a little bit of luck. 2 weeks prior, Jonathan Norman had tested dirty. Jonathan Norman was on methamphetamine. Not continuously, but that was a term of his parole. No drugs.
Mr. Norman feared that it would be just a matter of a few days before he would be returned to prison because of his violation of the conditions of parole.
On July 18, 1997, Norman is sent back to prison for the parole violation. Investigators now have some breathing room with this dangerous criminal off the streets. He finally confesses that he was planning to rape Spielberg and had been planning this attack for weeks.
And we know through both the forensic interviews that were conducted by mental health professionals as well as his interviews with the police department that he was quite infatuated with Mr. Spielberg. In fact, he came right out and admitted it.
On July 29, 1997, Spielberg is informed of Norman's violent actions.
I think we have a good stalking case, but unless I talk to him, he tells me he's afraid, he tells me he's going to cooperate, because I had had other cases where the celebrity refused to cooperate no matter how bad the stalker was, that I couldn't do anything. My hands were tied.
Finally, a phone call is arranged.
Spielberg couldn't even speak. He was so terrified.
The case against Norman is coming together, but Rhonda knows to secure a guilty verdict, she needs Spielberg in court. And to face down the person who vowed to attack you in a violent, disgusting way is a terrifying prospect.
If they don't come to court, if they don't cooperate, if they don't testify, as a prosecutor, I don't have a case. They call me, and in my mind, I'm just thinking, everything's going down the drain at this point.
On November 6, 1997, Jonathan Norman is arraigned on charges of 1 count of felony stalking for his brutal plan to rape director Steven Spielberg.
You couple the thought disorder with the prior acts of violence, the determination and the repeated attempts to make contact with Mr. Spielberg, it all makes for a very dangerous scenario. He's probably one of the most dangerous stalkers that the Threat Management Unit handled in the 26-year history of the unit.
With the trial looming, Rhonda and her team are working to gather evidence, but it seems that Norman's best friend, Chuck, may derail the case entirely.
I realized we're running up against the clock here. They go to Norman's apartment. It's empty. Chuck had cleaned it out. I'm just thinking everything's going down the drain at this point.
With the case hanging in the balance, Rhonda and her team frantically search for mountains of evidence they know exists. Luckily for them, Chuck has kept everything close by. Investigators get a warrant for his apartment and discover a treasure trove of disturbing items.
All of this evidence was about to be destroyed. What did we find there? Lists of his children, his children's ages, their names, the names of other family members. We found a receipt for the handcuffs. We found a receipt for night goggles, and we found the diary.
After dodging a bullet and managing to preserve the critical evidence, Rhonda's case appears to be coming together. Now it's time for her to meet with Spielberg and lock in his testimony.
It was very evident that Mr. Spielberg was traumatized by what he found out about Mr. Norman, was quite concerned about not only his safety, but the safety of his wife and his children, understandably so.
February 20th, 1998. The trial begins amid a swarm of media camped outside the courthouse, eagerly awaiting the testimony of perhaps the most famous director in the world.
At this point, it was all over the media. The courtroom was packed with reporters.
I would imagine that one of the reasons that you don't see Steven Spielberg out at big events, he doesn't walk red carpets, he doesn't do a lot of that kind of stuff, is directly relatable back to this case where out of the blue, some guy became obsessed with him and wanted to, rape and kill him. It's a terrible, terrible thing to have to live with.
As a courtroom illustrator, Mona Schaefer-Edwards is contracted to capture the scene inside high-profile court cases when cameras aren't allowed.
I get a call, and I'm contracted to show up in court and cover proceedings. It's always different. It's history. It's emotional. It changes minute by minute, and you really can't even write stuff as good as what reality is.
February 25th, 1998. The moment has come for Spielberg to take the stand.
As always, when a celebrity comes in, everybody stops talking. And there's a hush, and then he took the stand, and he looked very subdued, and he was looking at his lawyer, and he was terrified. From the minute that he was on the stand till the minute he got off, he was terrified.
Imagine how terrifying it must have been for Steven Spielberg to be in that courtroom. You've got Jonathan Norman sitting across from him, nearby, apparently wearing an electric shock device under his suit so that if he lunged at Spielberg, they could shut him down.
He was sitting on the stand, completely vulnerable. One of the most powerful men in the world, just sort of like quivering from fear.
During his 90-minute testimony, the director speaks about the impact the stalking had on him, saying, "I reacted to the information at first with disbelief, then I became quite frightened. I was very upset."
Norman probably found it very sexually exciting to be in the same courtroom as Spielberg. I can do whatever I want to you. I can look at you straight in the eye and want to rape you all over again.
Norman had been trying to get close to Spielberg for quite a long time, and all of a sudden, there he is, just 10, 15 feet away from him, talking about him.
He was sitting back, had his arm back, stared directly at Spielberg. Not a care in the world, not embarrassed, not sad or anything. Just like watching a trial go on. Unsettling, that was kind of unsettling. I felt terrible for Spielberg.
With Spielberg's chilling testimony complete, the defense works to highlight Norman's mental instability.
The defense was that he was a meth addict, that he was so out of it, he didn't know what he was doing, he had mental problems. And yet, I was able to show how he planned his attack.
I consulted to the threat management unit and to the prosecutor in the Spielberg stalking case. When Spielberg's stalker was initially arrested and taken into custody, I reviewed the information in terms of what his dangerousness risk was to Mr. Spielberg.
All of these things played into the trial, where I had to show he knew what he was doing, he was legally sane.
I think Rhonda was aggressive, in your face, articulate, cutting like a knife. That's her style. No pussyfooting around, just no nonsense. She was good.
Mr. Spielberg, do you have any comments?
June 1998. After a highly publicized trial, the jury finds Norman guilty of felony stalking. The real question is, what's Norman's punishment?
Outside, the prosecutor was delighted and said Spielberg was too.
The stalking law really, really works, so I just can't tell you how elated that I am.
Spielberg showed up for the sentencing hearing to testify, to beg the judge, please take this man off the street.
Spielberg puts Saving Private Ryan on hold to go deal with the court case. And the interesting thing about that is that there's very few directors who would be powerful enough to say, you know what, we're shutting it down while I take care of this.
I knew his history of violence. I did not want him to be back out on the streets.
The court rules that Norman's prior convictions can be used against him. With 2 prior felonies under California's 3 strikes law, he is facing a harsh punishment. He's sentenced to 25 years to life in prison.
Justice was served today. A very dangerous predator has been taken off of the street.
While there is no definitive cause of Norman's infatuation, Dr. Chris Mohandi was able to gain insight into his thought process.
I ended up interviewing Mr. Norman after he was convicted, and the day I went to see him, he was locked up in solitary because he'd been stalking another inmate. He had these delusions, and it basically had Steven Spielberg at the center of what he called the gay Jewish mafia that would enable him to break into Hollywood and be successful. And so he looked at Spielberg as a god, and that part of his task was to develop a liking by this god, and in his twisted thinking, to sexually assault and abduct Mr. Spielberg was part of that elaborate system for becoming part of this group. Mr. Norman, when I interviewed him, presented as very mentally ill. When I asked him something as simple as, "What can I call you?" he said Mickey Mouse. He wasn't joking.
Treating somebody with Norman's issues is typically unsuccessful. After sentencing, Norman is placed in a psychiatric facility. His exact whereabouts and release date is unknown. He'll be back on the streets when experts feel he is no longer a threat.
People with personality disorders in general are very treatment resistant. In Jonathan Norman's case with antisocial personality disorder, I don't know that there would be any successful rehabilitation. I think what you can hope for in his case is that he'll get older and he'll slow down.
Today it's Mr. Spielberg, tomorrow it could be you or I.
After emerging from this personal crisis, Spielberg picks up his career right where he left off.
Steven Spielberg did not let the stalking case slow him down in any way. Apart from shutting down Saving Private Ryan briefly to take part in a court case, he's gone on since then to produce, to direct, and make movies that have entertained millions and millions of people.
This case is a win for both the prosecution and for Steven Spielberg, but both sides know the director dodged a bullet.
My takeaway from this case is it was extremely aggravated, had a tremendous potential for a very harmful act to be committed on Mr. Spielberg. This could have had a very tragic outcome.
It's got to be terrifying knowing that just out of nowhere, out of the blue, someone can come in with intent to do grievous bodily harm to you, and you have no idea where they come from, you've never met them, you've never done anything. And that is part of the life, I think, that probably defines celebrity.
That underlying issue will always be there. And where will it manifest itself next?
The Spielberg case allowed that it's the moment at which you find out and you become fearful that matters. And it doesn't matter that you're 6,000 miles away. You're still in fear.